Hey guys, GhazzyTV here with another Path of Exile video, and today I'm going to talk about the gear progression of the Mage skeleton and build guide that I have. A link to this guide is in the descriptions below, and I wanted to make this video to help people navigate a little bit through the jungle of what items to upgrade and what to prioritize as they level up a build like this. So let's just dive into the POB, and I'll talk about the builds in the different stages of its currency progression as you progress through the endgame with the Mage skeleton build guide. Looking at the POB for the low budget Mage skeleton build guide, it is important to point out that before you switch over to Mage skeletons, you are going to be leveling with Absolution as the guide suggests. Obviously, the only way to go Mage skeleton will be to run the Dead Reckoning threshold jewel. This can be a bit expensive in the early stages of a league, but usually crashes pretty quickly soon thereafter. So before you get started, you're going to want to have one of these jewels located either in this position here or in the position up north of the witch starting area. Outside of that, the next step of the items would be to start off with something like a tabula rasa or a corrupted 6-link chest piece. That is something you want to go into first because links are a high priority. However, if you do get yourself something like a fleshcrafter, which will be the endgame chest piece for the mage skeletons, it is better to use a 5-link fleshcrafter than a 6-link corrupted 6-link or a tabula rasa. The link supports obviously that you would want to drop is not if you're running faster projectile, because then you'll obviously be running hypothermia instead. That would be the support gem you will lose. When you're clearing maps, you will always use Pierce with GMP or Volley. For lower budget, I'd recommend running with Volley and then switching to GMP as you get better gear, somewhere around the medium budget POB. Faster projectile will only be used for single target if you have the anomalous version, otherwise we'll use Ape and Hypothermia. Gear-wise, outside of the links and getting to the fleshcrafter, the first step of upgrading would be to get a generic plus level of skills wand with a trigger craft. This makes the build much smoother to play and is definitely something that you'd want to focus on. Now looking at the wand that we have in the POB, it is a convoking wand with plus level of spell skills. That modifier might as well be plus level of minion skills, and open suffix modifier for the trigger socketed spell. This can happen on a wand, it can happen on daggers, for example, as well. It doesn't really matter, but it's all about getting that extra level. Not only does this scale your actual damage output, but since we're using utility minions such as Animate Guardian, Raise Zombie, and Raise Specters, and also a Golem, these minions will get better defensive layers because of that extra level that you're putting on them. Outside of that, I do want to point out that the Shaper Shield with your recovery on block, or if you can afford a Surrender Shield, which is the unique version of this, which is very expensive normally these days due to a buff, this is not something that is mandatory, and I myself played the Mage Skeleton up to level 94, and I never got the recovery on block shield until I was level 92, I believe. Nothing that is mandatory, but definitely something that is preferable at the higher tier maps. So instead, you want to focus on getting the Tabula and then later Fleshcrafter. But before Fleshcrafter gets into the play, I would recommend getting that +1 with spell skills or minion skills, 1 with a trigger craft, and also getting a helmet with +1 level of minion skills. Now, the benchcraft for extra skeleton is preferable but not mandatory. So those are the two first items you want to look into after sorting your chest piece. Once this is done, then you can look into getting that Fleshcrafter to at least a 5-link state. And after that, I'd recommend going to a 6-link. It is also recommended that due to the average chances of fusing a chest piece with 20% quality is about 1200 fusings to get 6-link, and it's about 70 or 80 fusings to get a 5-link. What I would recommend doing is buying a Fleshcrafter, getting 6 sockets with jewelers, and then fusing spam it till you get a 5-link, and then using that. And then I would only ever break that 5-link to try and get the 6-link if I have way over 100 fusings, and then extra currency spare in case you get unlucky. And then what I would do is anytime I go below 100 fusing, I would stop on the next 5-link I get and go back and play with the 5-link till I have more fusings. And that's how I achieve 6 links in the league start. Outside of this, when it comes to gear upgrades, what we're looking for is just generic stats across the board. The oils and whatnot for the amulet would obviously be the next step after this. You don't have to go for something like an extra skeleton elder influence. That's a luxury stat. But what I would recommend after getting these pieces is to look into getting a bone ring. The reason one bone ring at least is very important is because of the extra minion resistance, which will help your utility minions like the zombies and specters stay alive by being a resistance capped. After this has been achieved, I would get myself a cheap version of the Darkness and Throne, since they can roll between 50 and 100% increase effective socketed jewels. You can always start off with the cheapest ones, which goes for a handful of chaos, rather than paying an entire divine for a high rolled one. And the reason we do this is to allow ourselves to get some extra juicy and rather cheap ghastly eye jewels. Because once the tree has been done with this build, as you're leveling up, you're going to want to smack in every jewel slot with a ghastly eye jewel. And smacking them in with something that gives you HP is very important, and the secondary stat would be the damage one. Increased minion damage when you use the mini skill recently is definitely a really good one. However, adding something like added flat cold damage or added flat lightning damage or even fire would be very, very attractive for a build like this, because the minion scales equally from all of these stats for the Mage skeletons. So that would be the next play that I would do. It's not until after this step that I would start looking into the assessment of my currency to see if I have enough currency to go for a medium budget. And in the medium budget step, you can still use a rare version of a block recovery rather than surrender, though surrender is better, so do check the prices before making a decision. But at this step, there's two things that's going to happen. The first one is that you're going to want to get a +2 level of minion skills. And the first initial step for this, I would completely disregard the increased mana reservation efficiency stats in the medium budget PoB on the helmet. However, this means that if you move over to this with the skills, you will not be able to run in either Defiance Banner or Precision Auras if you take this first step. And instead, I would then look to get the helmet sorted and immediately try to get a +2 level of skills, which is +1 for spells and +1 for minions, with a triggercraft wand, preferably with minion damage. Current state of the market at the time of this recording, they're going for about 4 divines, the cheap versions of this, and going as high as 20+ for the crazy ones. So again, +2 level of minion skills with a life roll on the helmet. Ignore the reservation mastery and the efficiency of skills on the helmet in this step. Just make sure you get +2 and also the +2 wand, and then you'll be looking at a 6-link fleshcrafter. So in which order you take these doesn't really matter. I would recommend getting the helmet and then getting either fleshcrafter 6-linked or the wand about the same time, because it doesn't really matter whichever you get. Normally, I would spend my own fusings till I get my fleshcrafter, and the currency that I generate would be spent on getting the +2 wand. Once this has been achieved, the rest of the gear in the medium budget is very straightforward and similar to the other versions. However, if you do oil yourself your amulet with a charisma, you can disregard the entire need of that extra reduced mana efficiency from your helmet by oiling charisma. However, that requires 2 golden oils, so that can be a bit expensive. So I would take this after I've achieved the wand, proper block recovery on shield, +2 helmet without the reservation modifiers, the fleshcrafter 6-link, and then I would look into getting that charisma oiling. Quickening Covenant can be quite expensive, and if it's too expensive, I would simply just disregard it and go for a simple ghastly eye jewel in between till it goes down in price or you have enough currency to spend for it. And that's basically the steps I would do to go into a medium budget state. The cluster jewel is a little bit specific here. It's going into a Call to Slaughter with a 12 passive. This would be the very last upgrade I would do in the medium budget, because we're going to use a similar jewel when it comes into the higher budget version of this build. So the large cluster being a little bit crazier with increased effect, Call to Slaughter, increased attack and cast speed modifiers, and preferably with a life roll. They can be a bit pricey. But since this is a generic buff and not a very specific upgrade to your build, you're simply going to want to push this as the last upgrade in the medium budget. So we're going to take a step and briefly look at the higher budget version. This is a build that goes into CI. I don't want to talk too much about this because there isn't really a good step-by-step to go into this version of the build. Instead, I will say this. You're going to need a lot of currency to play a CI version of these minion builds in a higher budget version. Because of this, there isn't really any good step for you to be going for medium budget and say, hey, I'm going to buy myself, say, an Aegis Aurora, or hey, I'm going to buy myself one of these clusters and start moving into this version. Instead, to be able to play the high budget version, due to the drastic changes it has from the medium budget version, you're going to want to have a lot of the pieces from the high budget sorted before making the transition. Most importantly, the defensive layers and the EHP comes exclusively, or not exclusively, but mostly from the cluster jewels in the high budget version. So for the ES version, you're going to want to have 2 of these jewels that is located in the PoB, and you're also going to want to make sure you have an Aegis Aurora, and that's just the baseline steps to even consider going into high budget. In this specific version, we are using an Ashes of the Stars with oiled charisma. So again, to make sure you can use the auras for the high budget version, you're going to want that as well. So as you can see, the prices for these things ramps up pretty quickly. Not to mention that we're also using mana reservation efficiency on our helmets to make this work. And then we're looking at things like increased minion damage on our gloves. We're looking at proper brittle ground boots, for example. And again, keeping up with proper rolled bone rings for that extra resistances. In this version, we're still using the Quickening Covenant, but adding Fortress Covenant. So this is a very expensive piece. So like I mentioned before, only do this if you're ready with a lot of currency, and preferably double check your character with the gear that you've accumulated for the high budget in PoB before making the transition so that you don't screw yourself over. And that's basically how I would progress the Mage skeleton from a low budget into a medium budget state. I've had a lot of fun leaks starting with this build. I brought it up to about a medium budget state myself when I was playing, was pumping out tier 16 maps. Currently, I'm playing a pure Spectre build, which I'll be doing a similar video for gear progression for. And I hope you guys enjoyed this type of video. If you do, let me know in the comments below. I've done this video for a couple of builds in the past, and this video will be featured inside the written guide in the PoE Vault page. Link in the descriptions below as well to help people navigate how they're going to start off the build. So quick recap. This build will start off in a low budget. Before transitioning from Absolution leveling through the campaign, you're going to get yourself a Dead Reckoning. Next step would be to get a generic +1 level of spell skills or minion skills 1 with an open suffix for a trigger craft, because that makes the build so much smoother to play. Also make sure you get yourself a +1 level of minion skills helmet, or 2 if you can. You don't have to have room for the benchcraft. As long as there's life on the helmet and this modifier, you'll be fine. Then you want to have either a Tabula or a Corrupted 6 link before moving into fleshcrafter. And once you do that, the next step, once you're sorted the 1 and your helmet, is to get a 5-link fleshcrafter. And then we are going to want to have at least 1 bone ring and start getting that Darkness Enthroned. After this has been sorted, we're looking at getting a 6-link fleshcrafter. And all the sockets that you're getting from either the Darkness Enthroned or on the tree will be simple ghastly eye jewels with either I can't even speak anymore. Holy crap, it's early morning here. Good morning. You're going to want to make sure you have a life roll on them. And then you can have either minion damage when you use the minion skill recently, or add a flat cold, lightning, or fire, because all of those will work as a damage scaling modifier for your Skelly build. And then when you go to the medium budget, the recap there is very simple. You want to prioritize getting a +2 weapon. You want to have a life recovery on block shield, either a surrender or a rare version. And now you're also going to want to have +2 on the helmet, and that 6-link fleshcrafter to be prepared. And again, in the medium budget version, we're looking at taking the cluster as the last upgrade. And the high budget, as I mentioned, we already tackled. That's about it. Hope you liked this video. Make sure you hit the like button on your way out and subscribe for more content. I'll catch you guys in the next one. So till then, stay safe. Keep rocking.